Why was she the only one who seemed to hear the silence between the gunshots? Natasha pressed her cheek to the cold steel of the Barrett, feeling its weight like an anchor against the wind that clawed over the Hindu Kush ridgeline. At 9,200 feet, the air was thin, sharp enough to cut inside the lungs, but that wasn't what rattled her. It was the silence between bursts of gunfire echoing across the valley, a silence that meant someone was running out of ammo. Someone was dying. Through the scope, she saw the chaos unraveling below. 8 SEAL operators trapped in the Korangal Valley, pinned from 3 directions. 2 were already down, blood darkening stone. The rest fired desperately, boxed into dead ground with no exit. Natasha knew the math before anyone called it in. Without intervention, half that team wouldn't survive the next 10 minutes. Her spotter, Thompson, wizarded to everyone but her, whispered wind data, his voice calm, precise, though she could feel the tension in how tightly he gripped the kestrel. Numbers rattled between them like an old language, knots, angles, drift. At this range, wind could push a bullet almost 40 feet off target. And yet, as she listened, her breathing slowed. 4 breaths a minute, 42 beats per minute. Her grandfather had taught her that trick, hiding from German patrols in Warsaw. If your heart beats slower, you hear the world better. Natasha heard everything now. The rattle of a DSHK being set up, the wet gasps of a wounded man, Morrison's strained voice over comms, caught between pleading and command. And beneath it all, the silence between shots. The silence she couldn't ignore. She had been here before. Not this ridge, not this valley, but here in this suspended moment where time fractured into equations and choices. Detroit, 1999, a girl in her grandfather's basement, holding a rusted .22 rifle so long it dragged the floor when she tried to carry it. Her grandfather had watched her squint at a tin can propped on a cinder block, then spoken in that gravelly Polish voice. Distance is safety. Mathematics is survival. She'd hit the can on her 4th shot. And again, and again. She didn't know it then, but every lesson her grandfather etched into her bones would echo here, on this ridgeline, where mathematics might save 8 lives. The SEALs didn't believe in her at first. Few had. She was too quiet, too methodical, too female, though no one said it outright. In Helmand, one Marine had muttered under his breath, "What's she doing here?" Until her round punched through a Taliban commander's window at nearly 2 kilometers and ended an ambush before it began. Respect didn't come easily. It came in fragments like trust chipped from stone. But Morrison, the lieutenant fighting for his men below, had requested her by name. Maybe he knew something the others hadn't said aloud. That when the fight became impossible, Ghost was the one you wanted in the shadows. Now Morrison's voice cracked through her earpiece. "We're FE'd, a passer 20 minutes out, 2 casualties critical. Anyone if you can hear me." Natasha didn't answer. Not yet. Her finger hovered near the trigger guard, but hesitation wasn't what held her. It was the pattern. Through the scope, she watched the enemy commander lean from behind his boulder every 30-40 seconds, just enough to flash hand signals to shift fire. Haqqani trained, disciplined. He moved like a man who knew he was untouchable. He didn't know Natasha existed. "Wind 8 knots left valley, 12 up top, pushing 14, Thompson murmured. "Mirage is dancing, holds gonna swim on you." Natasha adjusted the dials, her breathing steady, her pulse low. She thought of her grandmother then, the fighter her grandfather rarely spoke of except in fragments. A bridge held for 2 days, ammunition running dry. A final stand not for victory but for dignity. Natasha imagined her standing where she stood now, thin air scraping her lungs, gun heavy in her hands, the weight of lives pressing harder than the trigger beneath her finger. The silence between shots returned. This time it wasn't empty. It was expectant, like the valley itself was holding its breath. "Commander, at 2 o'clock, exposure maybe 18 inches, Thompson whispered. "You've got one chance." One chance, one round, one equation that couldn't be wrong. Her mind ticked through numbers like prayer beads, distance, drift, drop. The round would climb, arc, fall. 3 seconds of flight time, enough time to breathe once. Enough time for a man to live or die. Her grandfather's words came again. The best shot prevents the fight, but sometimes violence finds you anyway. Below, the SEAL named Rodriguez bled into the dirt, his buddy dragging him to shallow cover. Chin shouted for more smoke. Peters, the kid from El Paso, prayed in Spanish between bursts of fire. They didn't know her name. They didn't know she was watching. But in that moment, she carried every one of them. The commander shifted, leaned. A shoulder, a fraction of torso, the briefest sliver of exposure. Thompson whispered numbers like a metronome. 10 seconds, wind steady, 9, 8, 7. Natasha exhaled. A pause, the sacred pause between heartbeats. 3, 2, 1. The Barrett bucked against her shoulder, the recoil slamming her into the earth as the Rafo's round tore into the sky. 3 seconds. 3 seconds of eternity. The SEALs below kept firing. The Taliban pressed forward, heavy machine gun nearly ready. Natasha's cheek stayed, welded to the stock, scope still fixed on empty space, where physics promised a man would be. Then fire blossomed. A torso cracked open in a flare of light. Impact, Thompson breathed. Target down. The silence shattered. Shouts echoed through the valley. Confusion rippled the enemy line. For the first time, the SEALs weren't alone. Natasha cycled the bolt, chambering another round. The DSHK gunner was lining up, and there wasn't time to think about what she'd just done. No time to reflect on the impossible shot that had just altered the fight. That reflection would come later, maybe years later, in the quiet spaces where memories haunted. Now there was only the rifle, the wind, and the silence between shots. But even as she steadied for the next trigger squeeze, a flicker of doubt touched her chest. Not about her aim, not about her math, about what this would cost her. Every shot carried a piece of her, and someday she'd run out of pieces to give. Still, her finger pressed down. Because 8 lives depended on it. And because silence had called her name. What does 3 seconds feel like when an entire valley waits to breathe? For the men pinned below, it was chaos, muzzle flashes burning their vision, ricochet slamming stone inches from their faces, the thundering crack of weapons that drowned out thought. For Natasha, 3 seconds was eternity. She had lived inside those seconds before, training ranges, combat tour, silent nights staring through glass until her eye ached. But here in the Korangal Valley, those 3 seconds didn't just belong to her. They belonged to 8 men who didn't even know her name. The commander was gone. His torso split open, sparks of incendiary light scattering dust and fear among the fighters near him. For the first time, the ambush faltered. Impact confirmed, Thompson whispered, eyes fixed through his spotting scope. He said it calmly, but his knuckles were white against the metal. Natasha adjusted the bipod, nose brushing the stock, one breath steadying the storm in her chest. Her trigger finger found the wall again. She didn't look at the body. She never did. You don't linger on the ones you take, not if you want to keep breathing tomorrow. Through her scope, she caught the DSHK crew. 2 men wrestled the weapon onto its tripod, shouting, scrambling. One slapped the receiver cover down. Another shouldered the ammo belt. The big gun's barrel glinted in the sun, pointed like judgment toward the SEAL's thin cover. Gunner 2,423 meters, Thompson called, his voice clipped precise. Wind shifted right, hold 4.5. Natasha didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her mind was already inside the numbers. Wind drift, drop, the curve of the earth, the arc that turned bullets into fate. The Barrett roared again. A heartbeat, 2, 3. The gunner crumpled across the weapon before his hands could pull the trigger. Below, Morrison's voice snapped over comms. Whoever the hell that is, keep doing it. Thompson smirked faintly, still glassed on the valley. They think you're a ghost, he murmured. She didn't smile. Ghost wasn't a name she'd chosen. It had been given, earned. Sometimes it felt more curse than call sign. 2 more moving left flank, Thompson warned. Range 2387 correction, 2391. They're closing on Chin. She cycled the bolt. Another breath, another round. Both men fell before they could raise rifles, their bodies tumbling like shadows down the rocks. The valley shifted. Panic bled into the ambush. Without their commander, without their heavy gun, fighters hesitated. Some pulled back. Others tried to regroup, but hesitation in a firefight is death. Natasha tracked 3 more, each shot a clean equation, each body collapsing where mathematics demanded. 7 shots, 6 kills, at distances most would call impossible. Then silence again, not just between shots but spreading, the kind that only comes when fear replaces fire. Through her scope, Natasha watched Taliban fighters breaking off, dragging their wounded, abandoning positions that had seemed impenetrable minutes before. "Ghost, what the hell is happening up there?" Morrison's voice cracked. "Displacing in 30 seconds, Natasha replied, finally breaking her own silence. "Move your men west immediately." Doctrine screamed at her to leave now. 7 shots at that range meant her muzzle flash and dust plume could be tracked. A sniper never lingered. A sniper vanished before counterfire could find her. But she stayed, 30 seconds more just to be sure. Thompson finally exhaled, lowering his scope. "Well," he muttered, "that was biblical." Natasha didn't respond. She was watching the valley not for more targets but for something else. Confirmation, closure, proof that Rodriguez still moved, still breathed. Through the chaos she caught a glimpse, Chin dragging him, medics patching wounds, blood pooling but not spreading further. Alive. Her cheek lifted from the stock, the world suddenly too wide, too bright without the tunnel of the scope. For a moment she let herself blink, just once. Her hands shook, only slightly, hidden beneath gloves. No one ever saw her hands shake. "Pack it," she whispered. Thompson nodded, folding gear with methodical speed. They worked in silence, dismantling the nest that had just turned the tide of a battle. Within 2 minutes the Barrett was cased, scopes wrapped, data erased from the dirt. They moved like ghosts, erasing their existence from the mountain. But inside, Natasha couldn't erase anything. The SEALs would live. Rodriguez would get a medevac if he held long enough. Chin would keep fighting. The others would walk away with stories no one outside classified reports would ever believe. But Natasha, she carried the weight differently. Every time she pulled the trigger, she bought someone, tomorrow. But she also buried someone else. Some days she wondered if the math balanced, if distance and precision and survival added up to anything more than numbers in the dirt. Her grandfather would have said yes. He would have called it duty. He would have said mathematics never lies. But her grandmother's eyes, in the few faded photos Natasha kept, seemed to ask a different question. How many pieces of yourself can you give away before there's nothing left? They moved west along the ridge, packs heavy, air burning thin. Silence stretched between them. Not the tense silence of the ambush, not the waiting silence of the scope. This silence was heavier. Reflection's silence. Finally Thompson spoke. "You ever think about, I don't know, what it costs you?" Natasha didn't answer. Not because she hadn't thought about it, but because she thought about it too often. Instead, she said, "Rodriguez has maybe 8 minutes before golden hour. Let's make sure they get him out." Thompson nodded, understanding. The mission wasn't over. The fight below still raged in fragments. The Apache were on their way, but time had already been measured in heartbeats and blood. They didn't speak again until the sound of rotors thundered the sky, shaking the thin air as shadows of helicopters streaked across the valley. By then, the Taliban had scattered. The SEALs were moving, carrying Rodriguez, supporting Chin. Life had been bought, at least for today. Natasha crouched low, scanning one last time through binoculars. Empty rocks, abandoned weapons, no more muzzle flashes. "Clear," she murmured. Only then did her shoulders loosen, the weight of the Barrett dragging at her bones, heavier now than when they had climbed the ridge. Wizard pulled his pack higher, grinning faintly despite exhaustion. "Guardian angels," he said. "That's what they're gonna call us." She didn't answer. Her eyes drifted to the horizon where mountains stretched endless, sharp against the Afghan sky. Somewhere beyond those ridges more fights waited, more valleys, more silences between shots. And she wondered, not for the first time, how many more times she could do this. How many more pieces of herself she could carve away, until the ghost they called her wasn't just a name. Why did she feel more alone in victory than in failure? The valley was quiet now. Too quiet. Dust still floated where bullets had torn stone minutes earlier, but the echoes were gone. The enemy had fled, leaving rifles scattered and blood drying in the mountain air. The SEALs were moving west, Rodriguez strapped to a stretcher fashioned from poles and webbing, chin stumbling but still walking. Overhead, the Apache circled, their shadows sliding across the jagged ground like vultures too late to feed. And yet inside Natasha, the silence grew louder. She had done her job, better than anyone could have expected. 7 shots, 6 confirmed, an ambush broken, lives saved. In the record books they would call it heroism. In classified files it would be numbers, distances, angles, confirmed impacts. In the mouths of soldiers it would become legend. But Natasha didn't feel like a legend. She felt hollow. "West slope's clear," Thompson murmured, his voice low but steady. He hadn't stopped scanning, even as they moved off the ridge. His rifle was slung but ready. His eyes flicked between terrain and tablet, marking wind shifts like a man still living in the shot. She envied that sometimes. His ability to stay in the math, in the science, without sinking into the weight of the lives behind the numbers. They paused near a cluster of jagged rocks, crouching low. Natasha dug her canteen from her pack but didn't drink. Instead, she let the cold metal rest against her forehead, closing her eyes. She saw her grandfather again. The old man in his chair, a cigarette burning low, the smell of tobacco filling the small Detroit kitchen. His voice rasping as he told her stories of Warsaw, of impossible nights and the mathematics of survival. He had been proud of her, she knew. Too proud sometimes. He'd seen in her what others refused to, not just skill but conviction. And yet even he had not carried what she carried now. He fought with comrades who stood at his side, who saw every shot he took, every risk he bore. Natasha fought from the shadows. Her victories were invisible, her burdens silent. When the SEALs told the story of this ambush, her name would be a footnote, if that. And maybe that was what gnawed at her. Not pride, not recognition, the absence of it all, the dissonance between what the world believed and what she carried. "You're doing the thing," Thompson said suddenly, breaking her thoughts. Her eyes opened. "What thing?" "Staring into the void like it's gonna answer you." He smirked faintly, though his eyes stayed wary on the ridgeline. "I've seen that look before. It's not the void answering. It's just you asking questions you don't want the answers to." She didn't reply. He wasn't wrong. The radio crackled, Morrison's voice steady now. "Ghost, Wizard, we owe you. Rodriguez stabilized. Birds inbound. We'll debrief at FOB." Natasha acknowledged, short and clipped, professional, detached. But as she clipped the radio back to her vest, a knot tightened in her chest. She thought of Rodriguez's face. Pale, drained, gasps rattling through blood-soaked teeth. He would live because of her, she knew that. But she also knew what he would never see. He would never know the way she had steadied her breathing, the way her finger had curled on the trigger, the way the valley had held its breath with her. To him, she would be a rumor, a ghost. And maybe that was safer. Maybe it was better that way. But Natasha wasn't sure. They moved again, skirting narrow ridges, boots sliding on loose stone. The thin air burned their lungs, but neither complained. The mission wasn't over until they were gone, until they vanished like smoke back into the mountains. Hours later, as dusk bled across the horizon, they reached their extraction point. The Chinook descended in a storm of dust, its rotors hammering the silence into submission. Natasha squinted against the blast, the Barrett heavy in her hands as they boarded. Thompson slid into the seat beside her, securing gear, his usual grin dulled into something thoughtful. The bird lifted, banking hard, the valley shrinking beneath them. From this height it looked peaceful, just another scar carved into the earth. No sign of the chaos, no sign of the blood. Natasha stared out the open hatch, her mind circling a single thought. How many valleys would she leave behind? How many scars would only she remember? Detroit came back to her in flashes. 18 years old, enlisting the morning after the towers fell, her mother's hands trembling as she signed the papers. Scout sniper school in Quantico, instructors whispering about the girl, even as she outshot half the class. Nights in Syria, a sandstorm raging, visibility zero, her shot cutting through chaos like a scalpel. Every step of the way she had proven herself, to others, to commanders, to skeptics, but never to herself, because every time she proved she could make the shot, the question only grew louder. How many more pieces of herself would it take? The Chinook touched down at the fob, rotors still spinning as they disembarked. Morrison met them, his face drawn but alive, eyes sharp with gratitude. He clapped Thompson on the shoulder, then looked at Natasha. "Ghost," he said quietly, "that first shot that was." "Mathematics," she interrupted, her voice flat, controlled. She couldn't let him see the cracks. Morrison blinked, then nodded. "Well, mathematics saved us." She didn't correct him. She didn't tell him what it had cost her. That night in the dim glow of the barracks, Natasha lay awake. The others slept, their breathing heavy, the rhythm of exhaustion. She stared at the ceiling, hearing again the silence between shots, the pause where the valley had held its breath. Her grandfather's voice returned. "The best shot prevents the fight, but sometimes violence finds you anyway." She wondered what he would say now if he could see her, if he would still call it survival, or if he would see what she feared, that the ghost she had become wasn't just a call sign. It was who she was turning into. And in that darkness, with the weight of the Barrett still imprinted on her shoulder, Natasha asked herself the question she never spoke aloud. How long before the silence consumed her completely? Why did the applause feel heavier than the silence? 3 weeks after Korangal, Natasha stood at attention in a secure hangar, the smell of oil and jet fuel clinging to the air. The ceremony was classified. No cameras, no reporters, just a handful of officers, a few fellow operators, and the weight of eyes she didn't want. Admiral Patterson himself pinned the Navy Cross to her uniform. His voice was steady, reverent, the words scripted but heavy with meaning. Extraordinary heroism, exceptional marksmanship under extreme conditions, a singular act of valor that changed the course of battle. Applause followed, quiet, respectful. But Natasha didn't hear it. She only heard the pause before the Barrett's trigger broke. The 3 seconds of eternity as her round climbed sky and fell into fate. The wet gasp of Rodriguez, the whispered prayer of Peters, the silence between shots. She felt the weight of the metal on her chest, colder than steel. When the ceremony ended, Patterson pulled her aside. His voice softened, stripped of official tone. "You know, Kowalski, history will never read your name, not the way it deserves. What you did out there," he shook his head. "Men write legends, but sometimes the legends are women who remain ghosts." She didn't answer, she couldn't. Afterwards the SEALs approached her, less formal, their eyes brighter with the relief of men still alive because of her. Morrison clasped her shoulder, firm, grounding. "Kowalski," he said quietly, "that first shot treating winds like that, I still can't believe it." She looked at him, the lines of exhaustion etched into his face, the weight of command he would never truly put down. And she almost told him, about her grandfather, about Warsaw, about equations and conviction. But instead she kept it simple. "Mathematics," she said again, her voice flat. But Thompson, standing nearby, shook his head. "Not just math, conviction." He grinned faintly. "She had the shot, sir. I just called the wind. That's what we do." Morrison nodded slowly, his gaze flicking between them. "The team's been talking. We want to put you in for a call sign change. Ghost and Wizard don't fit anymore." "What then?" Thompson asked. Morrison's voice softened. "Guardian Angels, because that's what you were that day." The words landed heavier than the metal. Guardian Angels, she should have felt pride, gratitude, something bright. But instead, a shadow spread in her chest. An angel wasn't human. An angel wasn't flesh and blood. An angel didn't bleed or break. An angel gave everything and asked nothing in return. She didn't feel like an angel. She felt like a woman carrying ghosts of her own. That night in the barracks, Thompson found her sitting alone, rifle parts spread across the table, her hands moving in methodical rhythm. "You ever gonna let yourself be proud?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Pride gets people killed." "Bullsh," he caught himself, lowering his voice. "Pride isn't the enemy. Silence is. You never talk about it, about anything. You just bury it. And one day it's gonna bury you." Her hands froze over the bolt she was cleaning. For a moment, she thought of her grandmother again, that faded photo in uniform, eyes like steel, lips pressed tight. A woman who had carried too much and spoken too little. Maybe Thompson was right. Maybe silence did bury you. But what could she say? That every time she pulled the trigger, she lost a piece of herself. That she feared one day she'd vanish completely, leaving nothing but the legend others wrote for her. Instead, she tightened the bolt, reassembled the rifle, and said nothing. The weeks that followed blurred, training cycles, intelligence briefings, missions that ended before they began. Her body went through motions, sharp and precise, but her mind wandered. At night, she lay awake, staring at ceilings, counting heartbeats, hearing the echoes of shots she'd already fired. One evening, she found herself in the gym, long after most had turned in. The punching bag swayed under her fists, each strike harder, sharper, until her knuckles split under the wraps. Blood smeared the canvas. She didn't stop. Her grandfather's voice returned. "Violence finds you anyway." Her grandmother's silence answered. And somewhere between those echoes, Natasha wondered who she was anymore. Soldier, sniper, ghost, guardian angel, woman, which part was real, which part would survive the next valley, the next silence. Weeks later, the orders came. Another deployment, another Overwatch mission in terrain no map could soften. As she packed her gear, Morrison crossed her path. His voice was softer now, less commander, more man. "You know, Kowalski," he said, "you saved my men. They'll tell that story for the rest of their lives. You don't have to carry all of it alone." She looked at him, wanted to believe him, but the truth pressed against her ribs, heavy, unspoken. "I do," she said finally. "That's the job." He studied her a moment, then nodded. Not in agreement, but in respect. The kind you give someone you know won't bend. That night before Wheels Up, she stood outside, the Afghan mountains etched in moonlight. The wind cut sharp, carrying sand and whispers. Guardian angel, ghost, hero, whatever they called her, none of it mattered here under this sky. What mattered was the silence that waited for her again. And deep inside, Natasha wondered, would this silence ever let her go? Why did the new mission feel heavier than the last one? The orders came down in coded brevity: Overwatch in Kunar province, Taliban presence high, civilian traffic unpredictable, intelligence sketchy. The kind of mission that looked simple on paper, but Natasha knew better. Every mission felt simple on paper, until the silence between shots filled with lives waiting to be lost. She and Thompson boarded the transport in darkness. The engines droned steady, the air thick with fuel and nerves. Operators around them dozed, helmets tilted against bulkheads, rifles cradled in weary arms. Natasha didn't sleep. She rarely did before deployments. Her body sat still, her mind packing miles ahead, already on the ridge, already calculating angles, already feeling the weight of her rifle pressing into her shoulder. Beside her, Thompson nudged her boot. "You're thinking too loud again." She didn't turn. Better than dreaming too loud. He chuckled softly, but his eyes searched her face. You ever take a break, Ghost? The call sign still stuck. Even after Morrison's suggestion, the team still called her Ghost. Thompson called her that too, sometimes with affection, sometimes with worry. Guardian Angel hadn't caught on yet. Maybe because it implied something too good, too human. Ghost was easier, distant, untouchable. But she wasn't untouchable, not anymore. As the transport rattled through turbulence, Natasha closed her eyes, and memory pulled her somewhere she didn't want to go. Detroit, 19 years old, rain on cracked sidewalks. Her mother standing in the doorway, arms folded, lips pressed into a line that was equal parts fear and pride. Natasha had signed the enlistment papers the day after September 11th, her mother's eyes red from watching the towers fall on television. You'll disappear in their world, her mother had whispered. They won't see you for who you are. Natasha had smiled then, young, stubborn. That's the point. But now, years later, as the engines roared and another mission loomed, her mother's words came back sharper than ever. Maybe disappearing hadn't been the point. Maybe it had been the mistake. The transport jolted. Thompson's hand steadied her shoulder. We're close. She nodded, pushing memory back into its box. Focus, mathematics, angles. They landed under cover of night, boots sinking into dust. The air smelled of burned earth and diesel, the signature of a land scarred by endless wars. Their climb began before dawn, gear heavy, silence broken only by their breaths and the crunch of stone. Natasha felt each step like penance. By sunrise, they reached their overwatch, an exposed ridge overlooking a village tangled with mud brick houses and narrow alleys. This mission wasn't about operators, it was about civilians. Intel suggested a Taliban cell was embedded in the village, waiting for coalition forces to pass through. Ambushes, IEDs, traps, they had a dozen ways to bleed the road. Natasha's job was simple, see before anyone else could, eliminate if she had to, protect if she could. The scope pressed against her eye again, the world narrowing to glass. She scanned rooftops, windows, shadows where rifles might wait. Thompson tracked wind shifts, calling adjustments. The mathematics calmed her, numbers snapping into place like beads on a rosary. Hours passed. The village lived its day, women carrying water, children running barefoot, elders crouched in shade. Natasha watched every movement, searching for the fracture, the one thing that didn't belong. And then she saw it. A glint on a rooftop, subtle, almost nothing. But Natasha knew the language of light. She froze, focused, let her scope draw the truth closer. A rifle. A man prone, his barrel angled toward the road. His finger flexed against the trigger. Rooftop east quadrant, she whispered. Thompson adjusted. Range 1,890. Wind 3 knots right. Clean shot. Her breath steadied. Finger curled. The man shifted slightly, aiming lower toward the street where children played. Her chest tightened. Do it, Thompson said. But she didn't fire, not yet. Because what if she was wrong? What if it wasn't a sniper but a villager with something else in hand? A tool, a telescope, something harmless. Her heartbeat quickened. Doubt cut sharper than wind. Ghost, Thompson pressed, voice low, urgent. He's got the angle, do it. Through the scope, the man's finger twitched. His barrel tracked movement. Natasha saw a boy chasing a ball across the dirt road. The silence roared in her ears. Her grandfather's voice came back. Distance is safety. Mathematics is survival. Her grandmother's silence answered. How many pieces of yourself can you give away before nothing is left? She squeezed. The Barrett thundered. The man's body snapped back, rifle clattering to stone. Dust rose around him. The boy never stopped running. He never knew. Impact, Thompson confirmed. But Natasha didn't feel victory. She felt her pulse racing, her hands trembling. For the first time in years, she had hesitated. For the first time, she had doubted the math. Hours later, the patrol passed through without incident. No ambush, no IEDs. The mission was declared a success. Natasha and Thompson packed their gear, exfiltration set before nightfall. But Natasha carried something heavier than her pack. That hesitation, that 3-second pause, the boy in the road, the doubt that had clawed into her chest. Back at the fob, Morrison met them again, his relief visible. "Clean, no casualties, you did it again." Natasha nodded, but didn't speak. Later, in the solitude of her bunk, she stared at her hands. They were steady again, too steady. The others slept, the fob quieted, but inside her the silence grew louder. She thought of the man on the rooftop. She would never know his name. She would never know if he had children of his own. She would only know that one boy in the road had lived because she pulled the trigger. Guardian angel, ghost, sniper, soldier. Which one was she tonight? And how many more silences would she survive before she disappeared completely? Why did the silence follow her, even when the guns were gone? Back at the fob, Natasha should have felt relief. The mission was complete. No coalition casualties, no civilian deaths. On paper, success. In the eyes of commanders, flawless execution. But inside, something cracked. She lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling fan as it cut slow circles through the stale air. The room was quiet except for Thompson's steady breathing from the cot across. Outside, distant generators hummed. The metallic clatter of boots echoed down corridors. But none of it drowned out the sound inside her head, the echo of a boy's laughter, the rattle of her trigger breaking, the thud of a body falling unseen on a rooftop. For the first time in years, she had hesitated. Hesitation was death. That had been drilled into her from Quantico to Cunnar. A sniper didn't hesitate. A sniper read the math, trusted the numbers, and acted. And yet, when the moment came, Natasha had paused. She had doubted. She turned on her side, pressing her palm against her eyes, but sleep never came. When it did, hours later, it came jagged. She dreamed of her grandfather's basement in Detroit, rusted .22 rifle, tin cans lined on cinder blocks, his hand heavy on her shoulder. Distance is safety, mathematics is survival. His words sharp, commanding. But in the dream, when she fired, the tin can exploded into a boy's face. Dust, blood, laughter silenced. Natasha woke gasping, sweat soaking her shirt, heart hammering too fast for someone trained to slow it on command. She sat up, elbows on knees, fingers digging into her temples. Thompson stirred, nightmare. She didn't answer. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, studying her silhouette in the dim light. "You hesitated," he said quietly, not an accusation, a statement. Her jaw tightened. "I've never seen you hesitate," he added. "What was it?" Her throat burned with words she couldn't form. She wanted to tell him about the boy in the street, about the doubt that had clawed into her chest, about how, for a fraction of a second, she had wondered if she was the threat. Instead, she said, "Nothing." Thompson sighed, lying back down. "Ghost, you can't bury it forever. One day it'll bury you." She stared into the dark, her hands trembling in silence. Days blurred after that, training, briefings, missions. Her body moved like clockwork, but her mind drifted. She caught herself staring too long at civilians through her scope, second-guessing every glint, every shadow. She recalculated holds 3-4 times before pulling the trigger. Her reputation held precision, patience, perfection. But inside, she felt herself fracturing. The nightmares worsened. Sometimes it was the boy. Sometimes Rodriguez bleeding out, whispering her name though she knew he never had. Sometimes her grandmother, silent and stern, standing at the edge of a bridge as water rose. One night Morrison found her on the range, alone, past midnight. Barrett lined up, targets shredded to paper ghosts. She hadn't missed a single shot, but her hands shook as she reloaded. "You trying to outrun something?" he asked, stepping into the floodlight. Natasha did lower the rifle, keeping sharp. "You're already the sharpest shot we've got." His voice softened. but you're breaking yourself doing it. She fired again, paper tore. Morrison stepped closer. I read the reports. Rodriguez lives because of you. Chin walks because of you. That kid in the street lives because of you. Don't twist it into something it is. Her finger froze on the trigger. Slowly, she lowered the Barrett, the weight of it dragging at her arms. She turned, eyes hard, voice low. You don't know what it costs. He didn't flinch. Then tell me. But she couldn't. Words stuck in her throat, heavier than any rifle. So she walked away, leaving the target riddled, the silence louder than gunfire. Weeks later, another mission came. This one darker. Rumors of a Taliban commander moving through villages under the guise of a cleric. No confirmed intel. No photographs, just whispers. The kind of mission where the line between soldier and executioner blurred. From her ridge, Natasha watched the village below. Men gathered for prayer. Children carried bread. Women tended fires. And there, an older man in robes, face obscured by beard and shadow. He walked with authority, men parting for him. Was he the commander, or just another elder? Target fits the description, Thompson murmured. Natasha's finger tightened against the trigger guard, but her chest constricted. What if it wasn't him? What if it was just a man? Her grandmother's silence filled her. She exhaled, her heartbeat slowed, she steadied. And still hesitation. Ghost, Thompson whispered sharply. Call it, take the shot or stand down. The scope trembled against her cheek. For the first time in her career, Natasha pulled her finger away from the trigger. Negative, she whispered. Thompson's head snapped toward her. What? Not confirmed, not math, not yet. He swore under his breath, frustration raw, but didn't argue. The man disappeared into a building. Minutes passed. Nothing happened, no ambush, no signal, no attack. Natasha's chest loosened. Relief and fear tangled together. Later, intelligence confirmed. The man had been an elder, not a commander. Her hesitation had saved an innocent life. But the victory didn't soothe her. It only deepened the fracture. Because now she knew. She was no longer just calculating distance and wind. She was calculating morality, and morality had no perfect holds. That night sleep didn't come. She sat alone outside, stars sharp against the Afghan sky. The Barrett rested beside her, cold, silent. Her grandfather's voice returned. Mathematics is survival. Her grandmother's silence answered. Sometimes survival isn't enough. And Natasha wondered, was she still a sniper, or was she becoming something else entirely? How many times could a soldier hesitate before hesitation became who they were? The mountains were quiet that morning, a deceptive stillness that pressed on Natasha's lungs like weight. She lay prone beside Thompson, the Barrett settled, scope fixed on a valley trail. Intelligence had marked it as an enemy resupply route. For 2 days they had waited, watching, counting footsteps, mapping patterns. But patterns can lie. Through the glass, Natasha saw movement. 3 men winding down the trail, rifles slung casually across shoulders. Fighters, yes, but not attacking, not yet. Armed, Thompson murmured. Range 1890, clean shots. Her finger brushed the trigger guard, but she froze. The men laughed as they walked, past a water skin between them. One limped slightly, his boot worn thin. They weren't charging into an ambush. They weren't aiming at coalition troops. They were just moving. Were they combatants? Yes. Did they pose immediate threat? Not yet. The silence between her breaths thickened. Ghost, Thompson whispered sharply. We've got orders, eliminate. She swallowed. They're not engaged. They're enemy. You wait, they disappear into another valley, plant another IED. Someone dies tomorrow because you hesitated today. His words cut sharp, but her chest clenched harder. Her grandfather's voice pressed in. The best shot prevents the fight. But her grandmother's silence echoed louder. Sometimes the shot makes you less human. The men stopped near a rock. one lighting a cigarette. Natasha watched the smoke curl, the casual gesture of someone not expecting death from 2 kilometers away. Her heartbeat slowed, the sacred pause ready. The math was clean, the wind steady. But her finger wouldn't move. She pulled back. "Negative," she whispered. Thompson's head snapped toward her, disbelief flashing in his eyes. "Ghost. Not math, not confirmed hostile action. Their enemy," his voice cracked louder than he meant. "You think they'd hesitate for you, for me?" She didn't answer. The men moved on, fatting into the trail's bend until they were gone. Thompson cursed under his breath, ripping his eye from the spotting scope. He packed in silence, movements sharp, clipped. Natasha followed, her own motions heavy, weighted with doubt and conviction tangled together. By nightfall, they exfiltrated, mission marked incomplete. Back at the FOB, the debrief was cold. Intelligence confirmed later that one of the men was indeed tied to IED operations. Commanders noted her hesitation, her refusal to engage. The word lingered like poison: refusal. Morrison confronted her outside the tent after. His jaw was tight, eyes searching. "You disobeyed direct orders," he said quietly. "You're too good to second-guess yourself, Kowalski. What happened?" Her throat closed. She wanted to explain. That pulling the trigger no longer felt like math. That silence had begun to weigh heavier than orders. That every face she saw through the scope stayed with her, carved into memory like scars. But she only said, "I made the call I could live with." Morrison's eyes hardened, but beneath it she saw something else. Respect, or maybe pity. "You keep walking this line, Ghost," he said, voice low, "and one day it's gonna break you or get someone killed." He walked away, leaving her under the weight of his words. That night Thompson finally snapped. "You think you get to choose morality up here?" His voice was sharp, eyes blazing across the barracks. "We're not philosophers, Nat. We're snipers. We stop threats before they kill our people. That's it. That's the job." Her jaw clenched. "Maybe the job is what's killing me." The words hung in the air, raw, heavier than gunfire. He stared at her, anger giving way to something softer. "You're not a ghost to me, you know. You're flesh, blood, human. Start acting like it before you disappear for good." She didn't answer, couldn't. Sleep didn't come. She sat outside instead, the Afghan night cold against her skin, stars sharp above. The Barrett leaned beside her, silent sentinel. Her hands shook not from fear but from the fracture widening inside her. Ghost, guardian, sniper, woman, which one was real, which one was killing her? The next mission came sooner than she expected, a convoy ambush. SEALs pinned again, this time in narrow canyon. The radio crackled with urgency. Immediate fire support. We're boxed. Natasha's scope found the scene. Enemy fighters dug into cliffs, RPGs angled, machine guns rattling. The SEALs below were trapped, rocks shattering around them. Her body moved on instinct, bipod locked. Wind holds called, breath slowed. Through her scope, she saw the RPG gunner rising, tube shouldered. This was the shot. No hesitation, no morality, just math. Her finger curled. The Barrett roared. The man crumpled, rocket clattering harmlessly. Another gunner rose, another shot, another fall. 3, 4, 5, each impact precise, each life taken, each silence louder. The ambush broke. SEALs regrouped, returned fire, advanced. Survival won. But inside Natasha, something snapped. She cycled the bolt one last time, but her hands wouldn't steady. She pulled her eye from the scope, chest heaving, vision blurred with something she refused to name. Her grandfather's words came again. Mathematics is survival. But now, even math couldn't silence the question clawing at her. How many more silences could she carry before she became nothing but the ghost they already believed her to be? How do you know when a part of you is gone forever? The mountains gave no answer. They stood silent, jagged against a bleeding sky as Natasha lay prone one last time. The Barrett pressed cold against her cheek, the scope narrowing her world to glass and crosshairs. She had been here before too many times. Different ridges, different valleys, always the same silence between shots. But this mission felt different, heavier, final. Intelligence had marked the target, a Taliban commander orchestrating ambushes across Kunar. Ruthless, effective, dozens of coalition deaths tied to his orders. The strike team needed her cover to advance, but command had added a caveat. The commander often traveled with civilians, his family, his people. No clean shot, no engagement. Natasha's stomach tightened as she scanned the village below. Through the glass she found him, beard streaked gray, posture upright, movements commanding. He emerged from a doorway, speaking to men who deferred, who listened. But beside him walked a young girl, maybe 12, clutching his hand. Her throat closed. "Target acquired," Thompson whispered. "Range 1942, wind 3 steady, call it." She didn't answer. Her crosshairs followed the commander, but the girl clung to him like an anchor. He gestured, issuing orders. Fighters shifted positions, preparing defenses. The ambush was real. Coalition lives were minutes from being trapped. "Ghost," Thompson pressed. "This is it, take him now." Her finger hovered on the trigger, but she couldn't breathe, couldn't move, not with the girl beside him. "Negative," she whispered. Thompson turned sharply, disbelief in his eyes. "Nat, he's going to kill our people." "He's not alone." Silence stretched. The commander leaned closer to the girl, hand on her shoulder. Through the scope, Natasha saw it clear. The way her hair caught sunlight, the way she clung tighter, unaware of what her father's war meant. Mathematics couldn't solve this. Numbers didn't weigh innocence. Equations didn't measure the cost of a child's blood. Her grandfather's words pressed in, heavy as stone. "The best shot prevents the fight." But her grandmother's silence spoke louder. "Sometimes the fight is refusing to take the shot." Below, the commander barked orders. Fighters moved into position. Morrison's voice crackled over comms, urgent. "Ghost, if you've got him, do it. We're seconds out from engagement." Her heart pounded. Thompson's breath was ragged. "Natasha, please do it." But her finger lifted. "Negative," she said again, her voice steady now. Thompson swore, panic raw. "He's right there. I won't shoot through her." The commander vanished into a building, the girl pulled with him. A second later, chaos erupted. Fighters opened fire, RPGs streaking, the strike team boxed in. Morrison's voice filled comms, sharp, desperate. "We're pinned, now, Ghost. Do something." Natasha's scope swept. Fighters on rooftops, alleys, heavy machine gun braced. No commander, no clean strike, just combat. Her body moved without hesitation. Bolt cycled. Breath slowed, trigger broke. 1, 2, 3, targets dropped. Each shot an equation, each life taken clean. The team below advanced, breaking through. But it wasn't enough. The commander was gone, escaped into shadow with the girl by his side. When the fight ended, coalition lives were saved, but the target lived. Command would call it a failure. On paper, she had disobeyed. She had let the enemy escape. Hours later at the FOB, the debrief was brutal. Questions cut sharp. "Why didn't you fire? Why didn't you take the shot?" Her answer was simple, steady, final. She wasn't a target. Morrison's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. Thompson said nothing, his silence heavier than reprimand. Command wrote their reports, words like hesitation, refusal, failure. But Natasha knew the truth. She hadn't hesitated, not this time. She had chosen. That night she sat alone, Barrett beside her, stars burning cold above. For the first time in years, her hands didn't shake. Her grandfather had given her equations. Her grandmother had given her silence. And between them, Natasha had finally found her own answer. She wasn't just a ghost, not just a guardian, not just a sniper. She was a woman who chose when not to fire. The world would never know. History wouldn't write her name. The seals would tell stories of the shot that saved them, not the shot she didn't take. And that was fine. Because dignity doesn't always speak. It doesn't ask for recognition. Sometimes dignity doesn't fire. Sometimes dignity simply acts.